Welcome to Fully Exposed, a podcast that explores the taboo and unconventional in an attempt to educate your ass. I'm your host, Jessica Beuker. Let's get started. Welcome to another week of Fully Exposed. I'm here with our special guest today, Stella Palikarova. Stella is an interdisciplinary artist, guest speaker, event planner, and social justice activist, particularly in regards to the representation of disability in media and pop culture. Some disability-related themes that Stella focuses on in her work include sexuality, education, employment, personal support worker management, accessibility, and women with disabilities. Today, we're going to talk probably a little bit about all of those things, but we'll focus mostly on sexuality and relationships. So welcome, Stella.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. To start, could you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well. Those are a lot of the things that I do. I always joke that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. But yeah, I mean, I am an interdisciplinary artist. My background is actually in film and specifically in screenwriting, but I'm a writer-director, aspiring writer-director like everyone else. And most recently, I've been doing some photography and installation work. And I do a lot of public speaking around various issues of disability. Most recently, I presented at a conference in Denmark on cybernetic implants for people with disabilities and sort of how they're used and their ethical implications. And as you mentioned, one of my favorite subjects to talk about is sex and disability and dating intimacy when it comes to people with disabilities. But specifically, I always like to approach every topic from my own perspective because I don't ever want to be seen as a spokesperson for every person with a disability. That's impossible for anyone to do, and it's disingenuous because everyone has a different experience of their disability, and not to mention there's such a range, such a gamut of different disabilities that it's impossible for me to even say I can speak for all women with physical mobility disabilities. I'm a wheelchair user myself, so I always approach it from my own perspective and what I've gone through, experiences I've had, what I've learned, sort of what I would have wanted to hear maybe when I was growing up and a young woman. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, I can't wait to hear more about your opinions and your own personal experiences. To go off of that, can you outline some of those personal experiences of growing up with and having a disability, so that our listeners, I guess, can just become a little more aware of maybe some of the ways that your life differs?
Right. Well, where to even begin with something like that? I grew up, in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, actually.
Oh, wow.
So I was already in an environment that was pretty, whitewash, not super diverse. There was maybe only one student of color in my whole high school when I was growing up, and it was just myself and I think one other student who used a wheelchair, had any sort of visible disability when I was growing up. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with other people with disabilities or even very diverse community of any kind when I was growing up. And but I didn't feel isolated. Especially not when I was a child. I would say like a child through my mid-teen years. I always had a lot of friends, and I was integrated into my school all through school. Like I was integrated into all the classes. My understanding is that it's not always that way here in Ontario. because a lot of the time, if a parent can't afford to pay an educational assistant to be in the classroom with their children, then the children go to a specialized school that is more segregated. So I fortunately did not have that experience because my province did fund that, and but it's still, there are things that you have to navigate, like having another adult sitting next to you taking your notes for you, and not really having a whole lot of privacy as a teenager can be difficult, right? Because you always have other people around you helping you with things. You can't like sneak out your window to go somewhere to hang out with your friends, to drink beer before a dance or something like that. So there were things that obviously I missed out on from that perspective. And then obviously the older that you get, you start to notice your friends going on dates and having boyfriends and doing the things that teenagers do. And that made me feel a little bit like left out. And I started wondering and asking myself, how or is this ever going to be a part of my life? And what is that going to look like? Like, how will I date? How will I have somebody over to spend the night? Like, what would my first sexual experience be like? Would anybody even ever want to be with me? Because I'm different. And obviously when you're that age and people are looking at, you're especially concerned about your appearance, and girls are already stressed out enough about whether they're pretty enough and whether boys will like them. It's even harder to think, well, I've got this huge honking wheelchair, with me everywhere. How am I gonna stand out? Not how am I do stand out. How am I gonna stand out less? Maybe it's the better question.
Well, I definitely want to get further into some of those personal experiences, specifically with dating and relationships. But first, I think since today's talk is on the intersection between disability and sex, what would you say is the connection between the two? Or why is it so important, I guess, to be having these conversations?
Well, I think you said it. What is the connection? Well, the connection is that there is a disconnection between the subject of sex and disability, and it's for a number of different reasons, right? First, it's if you have especially a visible disability like I have, and I guess the other intersection is gender, but I'll get to that. Then you are often excluded from being seen as a sexual being. So there's often this perception, I think, that people with disabilities are either asexual or they're not able to, for example, give consent, that there's an infantilism that happens. There's also the idea of, well, what's the point if they can't feel it, right? There's an assumption that everybody with a physical disability has paralysis, or that even if you do have paralysis, maybe there are other ways that you can have an erotic experience or have an intimate relationship, right? But there's just this idea as well that there are more important things for us to worry about, like housing and personal support work. Where is our everyday help for daily living going to come from? Those kinds of things, which are huge topics, and they're extremely important. But I think when it comes to sex, we just kind of either don't want to think about it, or we ignore it, or by we, of course, I mean greater society, takes it as this irrelevant area of our lives. And it's really not. I mean, if you think about it, it's one of the most basic instinctual things that people experience, right? And it's like, how crass can I be on this channel?
Yeah.
It's like eating, breathing, sleeping, fucking. Like that's that. I not to sound too crass, but I mean, when we think about our basic human needs, those base instincts that people have, that's kind of what it boils down to. And I mean, that's not even getting into having relationships and having those connections. Having colleagues and friends is great, but most of us as human beings want to experience a romantic connection to another person. That's built into us. It's everywhere, right? It's not something that you don't see around you if you're a person with a disability, right? We all watch the same television shows and listen to the same love songs, and we are witness to it, and we want to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. The assumptions that people make about this is to take it down to, I guess, a more personal level, that make about you and your sexuality and how you engage in relationships with people. How do they go about, I guess, making those assumptions, and how do you navigate around them? Like, will people blatantly ask you questions about your sex life, or is it like a little bit more like dangerously hidden in the fact that it's the actions and the way that you're treated?
I think it's definitely a bit of both. I think that some things are much more nuanced and under the surface, and you can just tell by the way the people interact with you and behave around you or don't behave around you, that you're not ever seen in that way. Like, it's very obvious to me when I'm out with my girlfriends, like, and they get hit on and I never do, that I'm just not seen in that way. Mm-hmm. So that can be rough, but I think it's because, unfortunately, everything is connected. So if there is a lack of visibility of people with disabilities in the media and in pop culture and in even the educational system, as is quite often the case here in Ontario, then there's very little knowledge. And everything that people know or they think they know just comes from stereotype or from things that they believe to be true about having a disability or about somebody living with a disability. And that becomes very dangerous because in many ways that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right, so I have interviewed women with disabilities for my own research, and I've talked to a lot of people with disabilities, and it can very often be the case that ableism becomes internalized. And because people think that they'll never have access to a certain experience, they downplay it. So it's like, well, I'm just focused on other things right now, or if it happens, it happens, or it's not that important, or there is that side of it, and the other side of it is having very sometimes unrealistic standards of the type of person that you want to end up with based on movies or soap operas or pop culture. So there seems to be this extreme, this dichotomy, and then there are people who unfortunately are to some extent hyper-sexual, if you can say it that way. And I would, sometimes I count myself among them because you kind of overcompensate for the fact that you have a disability and that you are seen as asexual. So you kind of try to slip it into conversation, or you try to slip it into your interactions that, hey, I do have sex and I'm sexy, and I've had more sex than you have, probably. So, there are just a lot of things that can contribute to our stereotypes and to our lack of information. And it doesn't help that there's really no education, even as kids are growing up, around disability and around what it is like for other kids with disabilities. And that can be hard because on the one hand, you don't want to put people on the spot and ask them to talk about their lived experiences, especially when you're that young and vulnerable. But on the other hand, it's dangerous to be completely silent, because then people will just create their own mythology around it, and it can be completely false.
Totally. I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of our issues all kind of circle back to this media representation. And that's, it really boils down to, no matter what, kind of labels, I guess you have, or what you identify with, if you're not seeing representations of yourself, and you're also not having discussions about yourself and your own personal lived experiences, it's impossible, for that person to kind of feel like they can, function properly, but also it's really does a disservice to everybody else in the way of, it doesn't allow anybody to connect and to understand. When you're not seeing it, you're not faced with it, you're not having these discussions. It's very hard to understand something, and it all really just boils down to this like abundance of ignorance, I think. So, I mean, good on you for always being so open and talking about it, because that's definitely the first step. I want to talk, you do a lot of, you're a very busy person. You do a lot of activism, you do a lot of work, you do a lot of writing, you come from a very artsy background.
I do.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the different things that you do and how sex and disability kind of fits into those different things. So if you, it's kind of a vague question, but if you maybe wanted to just like outline for our listeners, like some of the things that you've been involved in, or some of the ways that you try to combat this massive problem of representation in the media.
Well, it's interesting because I was recently asked at another interview about what it is that led me into activism, for example, around disability. And I said it was completely an accident, actually. And in some ways, my work around any topic around disability, not just sex and disability, was never my focus growing up, or even in my undergrad and university. It was never like a goal to be, I'm going to be, a disability activist, and I'm going to be a social justice warrior. That was never sort of in my purview. What I always wanted to be was an artist, and, started out with, writing and filmmaking were my passions. But the more that I did things, the more I realized that, I had to draw on my own experience, and I had to draw on, it's that age-old adage, write what you know. And in many ways, that is very true, that you write most meaningfully and most impactfully. You create from a place of knowledge.
Totally.
So, it sort of bled into every area of my work. And when I was doing a double major in film and psychology, so that's how I started doing the research around, for my psychology paper, around women with disabilities and their experiences with dating and intimacy. And in my film work, I have a short film called Maybe Tuesday that explored from my personal experience again, using dance out of all the mediums that you could choose, but using dance to explore what it is like for me in relationships and sexuality, but really using archetypes. I work a lot with archetypes because I think they're very interesting. Kind of exploring this idea of being constantly performing your life and your identity, especially what that means to sort of perform being a sexual being as a woman with a disability, and being constantly feeling that you're being looked at and judged. So that was sort of an artistic exploration of that. And my current work is, I just actually got a Toronto and an Ontario Arts Council grant to create a multimedia installation. It's primarily photography based, looking at, again, my experiences as a woman with a disability, my subjective experience of sexuality. So the idea is that I'm going to actually be photographed having sex with a model that the model search is still on for anybody who's listening to this. But, oh dear, I don't know if I should have said that.
Yeah.
All the weirdos are going to come out of the woodwork. So anyway, but no, really, like, we're going to have a few sessions where I'm going to be photographed. And those images will be carefully curated, and there'll be 5 or 6 that are selected as the final large kind of pieces that are going to be arranged in a circular arrangement with an audio narration that accompanies each image. And those are sort of standalone audio narrations that you can listen to as you interact with any one image. But then if you sit in the center of the room, you can also listen to the audio tracks play simultaneously, and there will be a lyricism or hopefully a kind of poetic quality to listening to that as well. But I really like my work to engage the viewer as voyeur, because I think that that kind of subject of voyeurism penetrates a lot of my work, and to actively participate in co-creating the art. So it says a lot to me to sort of see which images people gravitate to, and it's kind of like choose your own adventure, right? Where you define the experience that you're having depending on what order of the images you view.
Totally. This is very interesting to me. First of all, congratulations on
thank you
the
very
grant.
much.
That's amazing.
I hope the arts councils realize they just paid me to have sex. But anyway.
They're like, you're like, it's too late.
I know. It's cat's out of the bag.
So was this, like, this entire thing was your idea? Like, it's all your baby. Like, you created this project.
Yeah, it kind of started from other activism work that I was doing a number of years ago, when I conceptualized and launched sort of the world's first ever fully accessible play party, which happened here in Toronto at Buddies and Bad Times. And I was under a different umbrella at that time, Deliciously Disabled, where now I've rebranded, and I'm working independently under Boundless in the City is my new brand. But that experience of doing that was very empowering to me, especially because I had so many people across the world like reaching out to me and wanting to talk about this, and like why I was doing it and what I was doing. And it was it was overwhelmingly a positive reaction, but I also obviously did have a lot of detractors as well. But I think it's a real testament when you have very strong reactions either way to a work. And I just realized that there is such a dearth of anything, to do with sex and disability out there, and that the art is really a powerful vehicle to explore that. And I am an artist, so why not go into it even further and push myself to realize something that might have, another great impact on people, hopefully, and allow people to question their own assumptions, but to also kind of share their own experiences in some way. I hope it'll motivate people. I hope it'll give people permission, to feel like they now have permission to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
That's a big motivator for me for doing any of this. So we need more voices in the conversation.
Yeah. Do you find that these, I don't want to say shock value because that's not the word, but I guess these more kind of bold, please, that's a positive word, methods in your work are more effective? I mean, I feel like it's kind of an expression of who you are as a person, but also it kind of makes, I mean, for example, like with the deliciously disabled, and you called it was a play party, you said? It was like the official term? Or
yes, well, it was being called an orgy almost uniformly throughout the media, but that's, again, because of that shock value.
Yeah.
But that's not what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But again, I think at least, I mean, yes, you're always going to have like those naysayers and those people who are going to throw their assumptions on, but at least, I mean, so many people were talking about it, which, I mean, it kind of turns the spotlight on you. So even though there might still be kind of those negatives surrounding it, you've got the positives, that come with it, and the people that actually are all open ears now and want to hear about what it is you're doing. Do you like using that tactic? Because I mean, this new project of yours also kind of seems it's a very bold move and very gutsy, and I think you're probably going to warrant the same responses, that people might be a little bit shocked, but also I think it's going to get like a conversation going. Is that like strategic, or is that kind of just is that just you?
It's I mean, I don't know if it's strategic. I know that when I put together the play party, it came from a place of, well, none of the sex clubs in Toronto are accessible. And it almost came from this somewhat selfish place of, well, I want to experience that, or like, wouldn't I like to go to Oasis or, M4 or like any of these other sex clubs and see what that's like, because I am a very adventurous and I am a very sexual person, and but it wasn't accessible to me. So it was that whole saying of if Muhammad can't go to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad. So I just decided I'm gonna make my own party, and and I got other people excited about it, and then as I was doing it from somewhat of a place of, I want to do this because I'd like to experience it, and I think other people would like to experience it as well that have never been able to go to any of these places, I realized just how big of a deal it was. And all of a sudden there were articles popping up from like Japan and New Zealand and like all of these places around the world talking about this massive disabled orgy that was going to happen in Toronto. Oh, those crazy Canadians, they have nothing to do up there with their polar bears and their igloos. So but it did get a conversation going, and a big part of that was because it was so shocking. And suddenly people were coming to me to talk about these things, and I thought, well, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, I'm not an expert. I'm only an expert on my own lived experience, and that's what I have to share. And I am in somewhat of a privileged position that I'm able to share those experiences, because a lot of other people who are institutionalized or are dependent on caregivers that are not liberal, that are not open-minded, that feel that they could have their services yanked out from under them just for having an overnight guest, because people are that close-minded a lot of the time, that there are those people who count on people that are in my situation to talk about these things because they can't. So I'm always very cautious about again saying that I'm not I'm not the expert, but at the same time, I try to represent as many people as I can by talking to them and getting their experiences and hearing their voice. And that's why I sort of started Boundless in the City as well.
Amazing. Well, speaking of sharing, I want to talk a little bit about dating now. I'm wondering if you could share with our audience some of your personal dating experiences.
Oh boy. Well, no. I think nobody actually likes dating because it's the worst, right?
I have to agree with you. I'm also a strong advocate for really disliking dating.
Well, because it's so, you meet somebody for the first time. It's almost like a job interview where you're sussing each other out and seeing is there a physical attraction? Is there an emotional attraction? Is there, is this somebody that I could hang out with and actually enjoy their company? There are so many things that factor into us deciding that we want to see more of somebody and that we want to potentially be in a relationship with that person. And for me, it's like this extra giant hurdle to overcome, having them even believe that they could be with someone like me because I have a disability. So I always feel when I'm going into a dating situation that, we're not starting off on an equal playing field, so to speak. If you can think about dating as a game, which a lot of the times that's how it feels, right? Yeah. And there are all these rules that you're supposed to know, and how much to share and what's oversharing and how often to call somebody, how often to text somebody. It's so annoying. But anyway. But so I always feel like I'm starting out from this position of, looking up at them, sort of aspiring to their level of normalcy, whatever they perceive that to be, and really showing my value as a potential dating partner. So that's really hard, and it's led to some very short-lived relationships where after 2 or 3 months the person dumps you for some ridiculous reason, like you can't play tennis with me. It's kind of like, okay, well, you can't make films with me and I'm not gonna dump you because of that.
Yeah, I think if tennis is that important in your life, that
right,
you've got your priorities really messed up.
Right, or you notice things like that they don't want to introduce you to their friends. They're somehow embarrassed that and it's especially stigmatized for able-bodied men, actually, because women in our culture are still seen as the nurturers, the caregivers, the ones that are going to be accepting and more likely to partner with, let's say, a man with a visible disability, for example. But if a guy is dating a woman with a physical disability, then it's kind of like, well, what's wrong with you that you couldn't get, an able-bodied woman? And a lot of that still comes from men choosing their partners based on how it makes them look and their status, and having, the arm candy or the woman that they can be, proud to bring to a party or to a work event, for example. And so it becomes really challenging. And when I was dating, when I was with my ex-husband, actually, we would often be approached by servers in restaurants that'd be like, oh, isn't it nice that you're out with your sister?
Really?
Yeah, things like that.
My gosh.
So, yeah. So there's even this assumption, or, oh, you guys look a lot alike. Like, are you cousins?
Oh my goodness.
There's always this assumption that, you can't possibly be on a date, or you can't possibly be together. And for me, because that's all I've known my whole life, it's like, yeah, whatever, fuck you, like, let's eat our meal. But for somebody that's just getting to know you, that's a whole lot of stuff to put on one person. and guys who already have these very fragile egos, let's be honest, that's a whole lot to put on a guy that's just wanting to have fun and get to know somebody and, get laid or whatever. So that can be rough. So dealing with all of that extra stuff that is coming from within the person and from the outside, it's a lot to have to deal with. And now that I'm single again, it's like, oh no, not this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, dating is already pretty painful.
It is.
And it is a little bit like a transaction, it feels like. Very superficial, it feels.
Yeah.
It would be nice if you could kind of just fall into something that was already
and the internet is
set up.
Yeah, and like the internet and all these dating apps like Tinder and Bumble, it's like double-edged sword, right? Because now, as someone with a disability, I can meet people more easily. Like, I don't have to go out to bars that are often inaccessible, and that's another barrier to dating, right? Is the physical landscape isn't that accessible for me. So it's a double-edged sword in the sense that I can meet a lot of people very quickly and talk to them, interact with them quickly. But because it's become like this shopping experience where, you read these articles about people going on dates and already swiping for their next one in case this one doesn't work out.
Oh, yikes.
That puts even more pressure. It's like, oh, hey, well, even though I disclose in my profile that I have a disability, reading it and experiencing it are two different things. Totally. So, yeah.
You answered my question. I was actually going to ask if you were on, if you use like online dating apps.
Regrettably, yes.
It's weird and scary to think about, but that's kind of, I forget how people meet. I really honestly do, especially when you're not, when you're younger, you're kind of like put into those institutions, right? If you go to school or if you work a job, then it's very easy to meet people that way. But if you're kind of out of that or you don't work or you're not in school, I honestly, that crosses my mind a lot. Is like, wait, how do people like meet organically? It's not really a thing that you see as much of today.
It's so hard, and the art of flirting is like completely lost on people now because everybody is like nose down in their devices, and people are just kind of forgetting the art of conversation, and they're forgetting, how to be flirtatious and how to be charismatic. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter because if you don't like me, I've got my Tinder right here and I can just swipe to the next pretty face, basically. And that's really sad, I think.
I think so too.
And I always say that, it's awkward for me because I feel like when I'm flirting with a guy, they either think I'm like spazzing or that they like they don't notice that I'm flirting because she couldn't possibly be flirting with me because she has a disability.
Right. It's just that added layer.
Yeah, it's that added layer of like, not being able to, not having even that physical proximity to be able to accidentally brush somebody's arm with yours or like flip my hair the way I often see like my best friend toss her hair when she likes a guy. Like it's a little bit more limited. Like what am I gonna do? Run over the guy's foot and then be like, oops, like that was my move. Did it work? Like,
It's because of it's interesting transition.
Always.
Talking they always work. It's been so smooth. Talking now about dating, and specifically for women, because there's this emphasis that is all too often put on a woman's appearance and a woman's body. Do you think that there's a difference in the way that women with disabilities experience relationships and dating than compared to men, with disabilities?
Yeah, there's absolutely a difference because there is a lot more pressure to look a certain way, and to put on makeup, to wear revealing clothing, to wear high heels, which, are problematic for people like me and a lot of other women who are sitting down constantly. Stilettos are not the most comfortable thing in the world, right? So you have to find creative ways you have to really understand your body and what looks good on you. And for me, it's I like my boobs and I like my butt, but I'm sitting on my butt all day, so nobody sees my butt. Oh. So I know, right? So then I try to do things like, highlight the cleavage, or, I love makeup and I love fashion. So for me, it's, I like putting on makeup if I'm going somewhere. But again, I'm in sort of a privileged position where I have a lot more help than a lot of people do. And, you don't get allowances from organizations that pay for caregivers. You don't get extras as a woman. You don't get an extra 30 minutes or an hour to do makeup and shave your legs, for example. So a lot of women that don't have access to that are not, again, they feel sort of desexualized, and it can be demoralizing for someone that wants to have that ability to express themselves and to look that way and to feel sexy in that way.
Let's jump back to the media. It seems obvious that, much like minorities and other groups that kind of get pushed to the outside edges, people with disabilities obviously suffer from a major lack of representation in film, TVs, even books. Can you elaborate on the depth of this issue, but also how you feel that it affects you personally?
Well, it affected me, I would say, a lot more, like, growing up and then into my teens and early 20s, I would say, than it does now, because I've just come to accept certain things that they are as they are and try to mold my life the way that I can. But when you're coming into yourself and you're really defining your identity and there are no markers, there's nobody that you can look up to. There's nobody that you can say, oh, she's in a wheelchair, but she's got great style, or she's funny, or someone to aspire to the way that other young people do. That can be really difficult, because then the only role models that you have to aspire to are other actresses or models or whatever that look nothing like you and experience life in not at all the way that you do. Right, so there are no romantic comedies or teen coming-of-age stories that represent authentically in any way really women with disabilities or people with disabilities. So that can make it very difficult, because it almost makes you feel like there's no place for you. Like you're just this undesirable other that there's really no place for.
So have you ever come across like any forms of entertainment that you feel have represented people with disabilities, but further than that, done it properly?
There are some people that are doing really great things. Like there was a touring art troupe, I think, in the U.S. called Sins Invalid or Sins Invalid, however you choose to describe that. That really is like a theatrical performance around the experience of sexuality and disability. And I saw another performance in a small theater here a couple of years ago called Bound, which utilized actors with disabilities sort of talking about their experiences, not just with dating and relationships, but just their experience of their disability. And those things are great. They're great starting points, but they're very grassroots, and it's a very niche audience that you get coming to these kinds of performances. And there needs to be big studios, that pick up these topics and they really explore them, and they have, regular cast on their shows that are people with disabilities. Like, we're making such great progress in almost every other, layer of diversity. Now we've got trans people on TV, we've got people of color represented more and more, which is all fantastic, but there's still this real absence of actors that are not playing disabled roles, but that are actually actors with disabilities. And that is so important, because if you want to come, we would never, for example, accept somebody, doing blackface, for example, right, because that's so discriminatory, and it's, absolutely, why would you do that if you've got people of color that are actors, that can play their roles from an authentic place? Well, it's the same thing with disability. Why would you have somebody pretending to sit in a wheelchair where there are people that are willing and very happy to play those roles?
Mm-hmm. And like you said, from an authentic place of really understanding that character.
Absolutely, and representing themselves and their experiences, and actually being able, hopefully, to approach a producer, director, a writer and say, well, I don't like this in the script because this doesn't accurately represent what I think about my disability or how I experience disability. Like, if we had somebody with spinal cord injury write that ridiculous Me Before You movie, we would have had a completely different story.
Oh yeah, that movie wasn't great.
The movie was atrocious.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, it was. So many people were horrified, and rightfully so, because, yes, on the one hand, if you're a character who's had this adventurous life of doing, being very wealthy and being able to experience the world in a certain way and being very athletic, suddenly having a disability is going to cause a massive life shift and make somebody feel depressed. But the message of the film was kind of like, but it's okay to commit suicide if you're that miserable with your disability. And it was just so bad.
They also chose, I imagine the casting meeting was like, okay, let's get in here the two prettiest people we can think of to play the male and female lead, and let's make one of them kind of quirky.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, there are a lot of pretty people with disabilities out there too, right? So
it was,
absolutely. Why couldn't they have cast somebody who was actually living with spinal cord injury? And one of the reasons is probably because he would have looked at the script and be like, "What is this nonsense? I'm not. No, let's rewrite this."
Yeah.
So there needs to be representation on all levels, from production to direction, the writing, the consulting, and the acting. And that's another big problem, actually, that I want to bring up, that oftentimes people with disabilities are asked for their expertise or asked to do consulting work, like on the TCC, for example, without being paid. And, really? That you're asking people for their expertise to consult on something that only they can consult on, but you're not offering to financially, to financially reimburse them for their knowledge. And it's almost like this attitude of, well, they should just be happy that we even asked them, because who wants to,
I was going to say, it's probably a lot we're doing you a favor, but that's very much scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of what you could be and should be doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of tokenism, and there's a lot of, well, if you want to have a better experience of Wheel-Trans, then we're giving you an opportunity to voice your concerns. But it's like, yes, I want a better experience, and I do want to voice my concerns, but it also takes me 3 times as long to get through the daily activities of my day, and I have to worry about medical appointments and wheelchairs breaking down and, potentially PSWs having to cancel last minute for their shift, and I have to worry about all of these extra things. So for you to say that it's such a privilege to be able to come in and voice my concerns about Wheel-Trans is very patronizing, and that already shows that there's this lack of acknowledgement and lack of awareness around what it's like to live with a disability.
You brought up a really interesting point to me, which I guess I had never really considered, and that's that there does need to be more representation on all fronts, right? I think when we think of representation, I think we just think of what we're seeing directly on the screen, but you're absolutely right. A lot of, just because there's representation doesn't mean that it's done correctly. A lot of times, there's that age-old debate of, is it more harmful because, is it better to have the kind of sloppily lazy depiction, or is it more harmful because it's done in a way that's completely inaccurate and not authentic or genuine in the slightest? I think having writers and people writing from their actual real lived experiences, and directors and producers is extraordinarily important, and would eliminate a lot of the, let's just throw a person in a wheelchair on screen to have that visibility, but essentially they still have no storyline. If there is, in the films that I've seen, if there is a representation on screen of disability, it's still not reaching those levels of this person is not sexually active, they're not engaging in any relationships, you're not seeing any of those things that are very, very real to a person in that position. So that's a great point. I think we need a lot more of that, and more funding for people to be able, for people like you to be able to carry out these projects.
And a lot of the roles that are written, like I'm not saying that it's always going to be possible to offer a role, a very big role to an unknown actor with a disability, but even the roles that are portrayed, if they can be written from an authentic place, if there can be consultants that work with the actors, even to tell them about their lived experience. And a lot of the roles that I've seen lately have focused on male characters, and somehow that's more acceptable to Hollywood, like to see a young man with a disability that's become like desexualized by his disability, to have this young woman come in and show him that he's desirable again. And that seems to be the running trope right now in Hollywood, and we've seen it in some movies lately. What's the one that was out with Garfield? What's his name?
Andrew Garfield.
Andrew Garfield. It was called Breathe.
Yes. I saw previews for that.
Great movie. And I mean, I believe that they did work with the family on that script, and they got more or less, they tried to show his story authentically. But I never see that story told from the perspective of a female character. And why is that?
Yeah. Hollywood favoring men? I never would have guessed.
Never.
That's so unlike them.
Yeah.
To wrap up, let's talk a little bit about where people can find you on social media, where they can read any of your writing. Where is your film Maybe Tuesday? Is that available anywhere, like for people to watch? Or
it is on Vimeo, but I ask people to email me for the password if they want to see that, because I still screen that film at various festivals and presentations, lectures, so that I am available to bring my media work to people. And they can find me on boundlessinthecity.com, and my email address is just stella@boundlessinthecity.com. And you can also find me on Instagram under Boundless in the City. On Twitter, I'm Boundless Gal, because there's not enough space to write Boundless in the City. And I am on Facebook. There is a page for Boundless in the City. So there are lots of different ways you could get in touch with me. My website does have a number of my articles that I've written or that I've participated in the writing of. So, yeah.
Amazing. Yes, I think everyone who's listened and enjoyed this talk should definitely follow you, because I know we're going to see some really exciting and interesting things. I can't wait for I guess I should ask about that. Your exhibit that you got the grant for, when does that actually start?
Well, I've been given
being made.
I'm hoping it'll start being made soon, but I mean, that all depends on finding the right person to collaborate for the project. I already have a photographer that I'm going to be working with, and I've been given about a year to put that together, so I'm going to be looking for exhibitors as well in the meantime. So if people are interested in knowing more about that, then also, give me a shout, and I'm happy to show them my other work.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I can't wait. Thank you so much,
Thank
Stella,
you.
for
Thank you
coming and
very
chatting with me. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's our show. Thanks for tuning in this week to Fully Exposed. I hope your ass has been sufficiently educated.
This has been an Evoke Media podcast.